Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Beef Cattle Research Council's webinar on new forage varieties. My name is Stacey Domilewski. I'm the Extension Assistant for the Beef Cattle Research Council and I'll be your moderator for tonight. The session is going to last for approximately 1 hour, but may go a little longer depending on the number of questions you have during the question and answer period towards the end. If you're on Twitter, you can tweet along with us tonight using #BeefWebinar. We're also going to be recording this session, and I will email out a link to the recording to everyone that's registered within the next couple of days. So if you miss hearing anything tonight and want to go back and review it, you can. I would also encourage you to take some notes as it'll help you to remember what you learned today. Of course, for tonight's webinar, you're going to be able to hear and see our presenters, but we can't hear or see you. So if you do have any questions, you can type them into the chat bar in your control panel on the side of your screen. And feel free to send in questions at any time during the webinar and we'll answer them at the end. If your internet connection's being a bit slow tonight, it may help to turn off the webcam window. It means you're not going to be able to see us, but it'll hopefully help your video to load or the slides to load a little bit faster for you. All right, so we'll get started. So this is what we're going to be covering for tonight. So we'll start with Dr. Surya Acharya talking about forage legumes and grass research at the Lethbridge Research and Development Center. We'll open it up to some questions from you and then finish with some closing remarks and where you can find more information. So with that, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Surya Acharya. Surya is a research scientist and forage breeder at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Lethbridge, Alberta. He's developed and commercialized high-yielding disease-resistant cultivars of traditional forages such as alfalfa, Sicer milkvetch, orchard grass, and sainfoin. He's also developed and commercialized the first North American cultivars of perennials, cereal rye, and forage fennic, along with many native Alberta grass cultivars. In recent years, he's developed a sainfoin cultivar, AAC Mountain View, which can be used for bloat prevention in alfalfa pastures, in addition to an acid-tolerant and a saline-tolerant alfalfa for Western Canada. So with that, you should be able to present there. Surya? We saw you for a second there, and then your webcam turned off.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Okay, can you all see me and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you very much for your introduction, Stacey. And I also feel privileged that I'm talking to so many people from my office this evening. I think depending on where you are, it probably is evening in some places and only afternoon in other places. It is interesting, and this is a really interesting experience for me. This is the first webinar I'm presenting. So I think probably for those who are listening to me, they would realize that this is relatively new to me. So with that, I think we'll start our presentation. Okay, this would be the presentation. Can you see it, Stacey?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Now, this is the title slide, but my presentation this evening or this afternoon would include use of forage crops, main forage crops grown in Western Canada, National Forage Improvement Study, alfalfa breeding at Lethbridge Research and Development Center, pasture bloat and bloat prevention, sainfoin improvement, Sandvine alfalfa mixed pastures, that's where I will give a little bit of data, other forage crop improvement at LRDC, and finally, I'll make some concluding remarks. So we start off with what forage crops are. Most people know that forage crops are group of crops that are fed to cattle. But actually, this is not the only use for these crops. Forage legumes are used for atmospheric nitrogen fixation in the soil, and many forages are grown as cash crops. The forage crops, if you can produce high quality forage crop, you can actually get more money per unit area than any other crop. They are also grown in marginal land. Perennial forage crops can grow in marginal land, and some of the examples you must have seen in acid soil in Prince George area, alfalfa and grasses are growing, and in very, very saline environment on the roadside, alfalfa and grasses also grow in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Some forages such as alfalfa can grow in field treated with city sewer. City sewer normally has very high levels of metals, and not many crops can be adapted to that. That's why they cannot grow, whereas alfalfa has no difficulty. It grows in that environment. Sandvine is another crop that can grow under extremely dry conditions in Western Canada. Forages can also be used for desertification control and carbon sequestration. I did not find a slide to show from Western Canada. That's why I'm using a slide from Inner Mongolia, where they're planting forage crops in particular formats so that the sand that moves with the wind and all that can be prevented, and the Inner Mongolia desert will not end up in Beijing. So forages can be used in low input agriculture, conservation of diversity, and more effective use of marginal lands. Some species are useful for reclamation of land disturbed by industrial activities such as open pit coal mines, pipeline right-of-way, power line right-of-way. Forages vary in their morphology and ability to derive resources from different parts of the soil profile, and so perform well in mixtures. My program at Lethbridge Research and Development Center aims at producing mixed pastures for better improvement, better growth of animals in Alberta and Western Canada, I should say. So in general, if we were to put forages, give a definition for forages, it would be that forage crops are grass, legume, or other plant species that are grown for livestock feed, as well as used in land conservation and reclamation. The entire above ground part of the plant, including the vegetative portion of the plant, is consumed by the livestock, and therefore that is the entire plant is the economic product in this case, unlike cereals or oilseeds, where only the seed is the economic product. Some important forage crops for Western Canada are, this one is sandvine on your left, then alfalfa, red clover, sisal milkweed, birdsfoot trefoil, and we have grasses like brome grass, orchard grass, and meadow brome grass. These are the most popular ones, but there are other crops people use as forage crops in Western Canada. So I'll pause for a while for a poll question, if Stacey can put that.
Yeah, for sure. So for the poll questions, this is your opportunity to participate. So we'll have them throughout the webinar here. So I'm going to launch the poll question. Your answers here are anonymous to the rest of the audience. So you can select the answers that select all of them that are apply. So where do you find out more information on new forages or seed varieties? From websites, TV or radio, farm newspaper, seed companies, neighbors, or other producers. So you can click the ones that apply most to you. And we'll give you a couple seconds here to get your answers in.
Please answer the poll questions. That way I think it would be a little more interactive.
All right, so it looks like almost everybody's in here. So the results show about 32% of people here say they get it from websites, 29% say farm newspapers, and another 29% say seed companies, and 11% say neighbors or other producers. All right.
Great. So we'll move to value of forages and forage breeding. And you probably know that some of these sites are Agriculture Agri-Food Canada research and science and technology sites, whereas others marked here are sites that have offices or facilities where we can do some testing. As far as the forages, value of forages is concerned, alfalfa and alfalfa mixtures occupy about 4.5 million hectares of land in Canada. All other tame hay crops occupy another 2.3 million hectares. Tame or seeded pasture is 5.5 million hectares. And on top of that, we have natural land for pasture that is 14.7 million hectares. So this area, if you combine everything, it probably would cross all the other crops combined. The total cattle population in Canada is about 12.3 million. Total cattle population in Alberta is about 5 million. We have about 4 million people, but 5 million cattle. And cattle eat a lot more than human beings. That's why it is so important, a group of crop for Alberta condition. Forages are therefore valued at 5 billion per year in Alberta. Let's talk a little bit about the forage breeding in Canada. I think we have forage breeding happening in about 5 different research centers. In Truro, Nova Scotia, I think we have Dr. Yusuf Papadopoulos, who is developing red clover and bird's foot trefoil cultivars. Although he is actually the leader of the entire national study. And it is probably interesting to note that all of us work together. We all have joint projects. We always collaborate with each other. But we also have some specific crops that we are interested that has more value for the region we are in. In Saint Foy, we have Dr. Annie Claussens. She deals with alfalfa, timothy, orchard grass, smooth and meadow brome grass. In Saskatoon, we have Bruce Coleman and Bill Biligetu, who are dealing with smooth, meadow, and hybrid bromes, timothy, crested wheatgrass, and native grasses. In Swift Current, we don't have a forage breeder at this time, but Dr. Alan Iwasa helps me in running the salt lab and also selecting for grazing tolerance in Swift Current area. And yours truly, me, I deal with alfalfa, sandfoin, sisal milkweed, orchard grass. These are the traditional forages, and I also worked on perennial cereal rye, fenugreek, and native grasses. And these 3 are considered non-traditional forages. They were not forages before. I have tried to establish them as forage crops. National Forage Study, we all have the same goal. We work with this objective, utilize forage genetic variability to enhance cropping systems, productivity, and resiliency. Now, I will concentrate on my program at Lethbridge. I deal with alfalfa, sisal milkweed, sandfoin. These are the 3 legume crops. orchard grass is the grass, and the giant wild rye is the other grass. But fenugreek also is a legume crop, although it is an annual. So these are the 6 crops I deal with in Lethbridge. Let me go into individual crops and the goals for breeding. Each crop is different. Alfalfa is by far the most important crop here. That's why I spend most of my time in alfalfa breeding. And there, the breeding goal is to improve forage yield and tolerance to diseases. And nowadays, I'm working on grazing tolerance. I have produced recently acid tolerant and saline tolerant cultivars. Why we work on alfalfa? I think these are the reasons. I think most people know alfalfa is the most widely used forage legume in Western Canada. It is not just in Western Canada. I think it is probably the most widely used forage legume in the whole world. It's grown on about 2.6 million hectares in Western Canada, widely adapted, quick to establish, produces high forage yield and quality. Cattle preference and performance is very high. And because of all this, alfalfa is often referred to as the queen of forages. But this queen of forages has some weaknesses, and one of the main weaknesses is it can cause bloat. It cannot survive in mixed stands because I think it is simply because breeders are not breeding for mixed stands. They normally breed for pure stand of alfalfa. Limited tolerance to acid or saline soil, and we also had disease susceptibility to verticillium wilt and bacterial wilt in the past, which we have by and large solved with high levels of resistance to both verticillium and bacterial wilt. And these diseases are more serious in areas with high moisture and where we have irrigation. So the Lethbridge Research and Development Breeding Program has produced high-yielding and highly resistant AC Blue Jay, AC Longview, and AC Dalton alfalfa cultivars for Western Canada. During the past 5 years, focus was to develop acid and salt-tolerant cultivars. In 2011, we registered the first saline-tolerant alfalfa cultivar, and it is called AC Bridgeview. In 2013, the first acid-tolerant alfalfa cultivar was produced with adaptation to Western Canada, and it is called AAC Meadowview. Now, attention is on development of grazing-tolerant alfalfa cultivars, and for this, we have a two-pronged approach. One is new alfalfa with grazing tolerance. Two, bloat control in alfalfa pasture. Let me say a little bit about bloat. I think you probably all know that this frothy substance is because it causes bloat. The gas that is formed in the fermentation process in the rumen cannot be expelled. It gets trapped in this frothy material, and the animal, in extreme cases, can choke and even die. But always the animals don't die. Most of the time, if it is not a very high level of bloat, then they may survive from it. But the fear of this pasture bloat discourages alfalfa grazing, and thus less alfalfa use and consequently economic loss. So what would be the solution to this? Bloat-free alfalfa would be the ideal solution to this problem, but this has been elusive. The next best way to increase alfalfa use is to grow mixed stands with bloat-free legume. Go ahead, Stacy.
All right, so our next poll question here. So do you grow forages in pure stands, mixed stands, some of both, or I don't grow forages? So select the one that best applies to your operation. I'll give you a couple more seconds here to get your answers in. All right. So results from this one, it looks like by far most of are growing in mixed stands, so about 81%. 6% say they grow in pure stands, about 9% are both, and 3% of people today don't grow forages. And there you go.
Okay, now let me talk to you about my pet subject for the past few years. I've been heavily involved in bloat-free legume sandfoin. If you look at this crop when it is under bloom, I think it looks beautiful. Just like looking at a canola crop. Canola crop looks yellow, but this looks pink. It's beautiful. But it is not just good to look at, it also has very high quality and palatability. The other important thing is it is a very low proportion of this can prevent bloat in alfalfa if you can make sure that the animal is getting both alfalfa and sandfoin together. And that is the information which I knew, but then the question was, why is it not popular and used for bloat prevention in alfalfa pasture? And the answer is this. Available sandfoin cultivars did not produce as much biomass as alfalfa, although they were all easy to establish. They did not survive in mixed alfalfa stands. They did not regrow at the same rate as alfalfa after grazing, and so could not be used for bloat prevention all summer. And also, they did not have tolerance for frequent cutting or grazing. Therefore, my breeding program started with a very simple objective: selection for tolerance to frequent cutting and ability to survive in mixed alfalfa stand. And of course, as breeders, we always have to pay attention to yield. Without yield going along with other improvements, nobody would be interested in growing the crop. And lo and behold, with a little bit of luck, with a slightly different modified method for selection and things like that, we were very, very lucky to have developed several new sandfoin populations with the ability to survive in mixed alfalfa stands, tolerate frequent cutting, and fortunately produce high biomass yield, although yield was the last thing I was selecting in my breeding program. So now then, the challenge was to prove that the new populations are better than the old cultivar Nova in pure and mixed alfalfa hay and pasture stands. As a breeder, it was easy for me to produce these new populations, but this is a slightly different challenge, which I had to take it, and with the help of some collaborators from those who have access to animals and things like that, we have done some work, and I will present to you some of that data. Just to prove that some of the new populations are performing well, first of all, we had to grow them in multiple year trials and multiple locations and things like that. I will just present one location so that which represents the overall performance of these. And you can see here, if you take Nova as the standard, 100%, Longview, which is a high yielding alfalfa, it follows the same pattern what we have read in our literature, that alfalfa will out-yield sandfoin by 30%. Whereas if you see the two other new populations here, one is 3902 and the other one is 3519, they are even yielding better than even alfalfa, which was not at all considered in the past. Contrary to popular belief, that's why I say that some new sandfoin populations produce as much biomass as alfalfa or better biomass than alfalfa in Lethbridge. I had to be very clear about this was the Lethbridge data. It was no different in other locations, but I will stick to what the table shows. Another experiment where we had mixed stands and pure stands. You can see this is of course under irrigation in Lethbridge. Nova was, if you take Nova as 100%, some of our new populations yielded better than that, Sandfoin in terms of pure Sandfoin stand. But when you combine it with alfalfa, the yield performance is much better than either alfalfa or Sandfoin. AC Graceland is an alfalfa variety. Is yielding 119%, but some of these are producing 120, 125, 27 to 30%. So that's why some new Sandfoin populations produce more biomass with alfalfa than Nova, we can say. A third interesting piece of information I wanted to present here is if you look at alfalfa and Sandfoin mixtures in the third production year, you can see Nova, when it is with Blue Jay or Graceland or Longview, has gone down significantly. It's almost non-existent. Whereas if you look at this population here, 3902 with Blue Jay, Graceland or Longview, they're all surviving. Even in the second cut, they are more than 20% in the population. That tells me that new Sandfoin populations produce higher proportion of dry matter in mixed alfalfa stands than Nova. The variability is more in the second cut compared to the first, and this one, the 3902, is actually now AAC Mountain View, which would be available in the market now. There is another population which is also doing very well, producing a high proportion of Sandfoin in the mixed stand, and that would be 3519. You don't even have to cut the plant and weigh them and all that. You can actually see how the new populations are doing well in the field situation. The 3-year-old mixed alfalfa mixed plots, here you have 3900 with Longview, and there is Nova with Graceland. Graceland is not as competitive as Longview. Even then, Nova is almost non-existent in that population in the third year. So what that means is, you can summarize all that, or the take-home message I can say, is newly developed Sandfoin populations can produce higher biomass yield than existing cultivars, and some have produced similar or higher yield than high-yielding alfalfa cultivars. New Sandfoin populations can stay in alfalfa pasture in higher proportions than Nova for 3 to 4 years, and the mixed stands out-yield pure alfalfa stands. So that is important to remember. Now, Stacy, can go for another poll question if you want.
All right. So our next question here is, what are the problems associated with the crops that you grow? So are they environmental type programs, seed availability, inoculant availability? Are they economic or other? So you can select all that apply in this one as well. All right, just give a couple more seconds here, get some final votes in. All right. So the results here, so it looks like about 52% say they have some environmental concerns, 35% say seed availability, only 6% say inoculant availability, 35% say there's economic concerns, and 19% have other concerns.
Okay. So then, after you saw the result of Sandfoin when it is growing, I think we had to also look at bloat prevention, whether actually these Sandfoins only are growing or they actually can prevent bloat when they are grown mixed with alfalfa. And so we had pastures established, and the interesting thing was, because Nova does not stay in the stand for very long, That's why we had a perfect situation where we could compare some with the low levels of sandpoint and some with high levels of sandpoint in terms of their bloat incidence. And here it is. This was again done in Lethbridge. We had some paddocks with only 7% in the second year and 5% in the third year. And these are NOVA plots where we had 7 and 5% sandpoint in the stand. And we had 35-19 population, which I showed you was doing well, had 29 in year 2 and 28% in year 3. And you can see the bloat incidence. Where the sandpoint population was low, you had very high bloat incidence, and some of these bloats, some of these animals bloated multiple times. Whereas if you have high proportion of sandpoint, you had very few bloating animals, and none of them had multiple distensions, and the highest bloat score was only 1. And here also in this third year is the same thing. There is only 1 animal that bloated in the third year. And this experiment was conducted with the idea to maximize bloat so that we can actually see it, observe it, and can record this. And this is interesting that only 1 animal, when you had about 28% sandpoint in the stand, we had only 1 animal bloating, and that too, it was a very low level of bloat. So I summarize it as under direct grazing and newly developed sandpoint population prevented bloat about 98%, as it provided higher proportion, more than 25% dry matter in mixed stands with AC Blue Jay alfalfa than NOVA, which only was about 5% on the dry matter basis for 3 years. So I think I don't want to, again, for consideration for time, I don't want to show any data for average daily gains and live weight gains. But again, the new populations and NOVA, all of them had similar average daily gains and live weight gains. And those gains were more or less like the gains people get when they have animals in the feedlot. So it's very high levels. So I can boldly say that new sandpoint populations, including Mountain View, when grown with alfalfa in mixed stands, will produce high average daily gains and live weight gains. But the interesting part is it would do that without causing bloat in grazing cattle. If you have NOVA, because of high proportion of alfalfa, the gain will be the same, but the animals would be exposed to bloat. That is the major difference between the new population and NOVA. Can you go ahead, Stacy?
All right, so our last poll question here, I guess there's one more. So what specific forage breeding research would you like to see conducted in the future? So you can select one or more of the following: disease resistance, drought or salt tolerance, higher yield, higher quality, and bloat tolerance. So select those that you would like to most see. I'll give you a couple more minutes or seconds here. All right, so it looks like most would be drought or salt tolerance at about 58%. 23% they'd like to see research into disease resistance. 48% say into higher yield. 52% say higher quality, and 48% say bloat tolerance. So all fairly close. And there you
go. Okay. So now that you have heard about alfalfa and sandpoint, we'll go to other forage crops that I deal with. And the first one is another bloat-free legume. It is considered, it's called sisal milkweed. This is a very long-lived crop which maintains quality all through the year. Even with mature pods hanging, it maintains high quality. So it's an interesting crop from that standpoint. It did not yield as much as alfalfa, and also it was very slow to establish. That's why it is not popular. It's not used to the extent it should be used. So for this crop, the idea was to improve seedling vigor and forage yield. And over the years, I think we have produced two size of milk veg cultivars. One was AC Oxley 2, and the other one now recently we have produced is AC Velt. And this the second cultivar released from LRC program. Seed for commercial production for these cultivars are now available in the market for production in Western Canada. And the method I used was actually very simple. To improve seedling vigor, I used a deep seeding method. Normally, we recommend forage seed to be placed or seeded about a centimeter deep, but in this case, I seeded 10 centimeters deep just to see which ones can come up. And the one that came up, because this is an open pollinated crop with every single seed being unique in the genotype, I selected them and developed these populations. And lo and behold, they are doing very, very well. You can see in the test here that AC Velt is way better than both Oxley and Oxley 2, which were older varieties. Now coming back to another traditional crop, this is orchard grass. Orchard grass breeding goals were for mainly winter hardiness, seed yield, and forage yield. And of course, I have included disease resistance and digestibility as selection criteria for my new variety. We have produced some disease-resistant types, but in recent years, we have also produced a very highly winter hardy and high-yielding orchard grass, and that was called AC Kayak. And this year, I am planning to release a new synthetic cultivar, which would have improved winter hardiness, forage yield, and dry matter digestibility. And this one, we will be calling it AAC Greenview. This year, we will be giving it to a private company for multiplication and eventual distribution in Western Canada. Orchard grass, I think in the past, most of the orchard grass varieties came from Europe. They did not have the winter hardiness necessary for our dry winters in Western Canada. That's why winter hardiness is by far the most important consideration for orchard grass cultivars. Now I will go into a non-traditional forage crop. This crop looks good, and I think it is also very high yielding. It is a legume crop. It is completely bloat-free. That's why it has a good place in our rotations. But it is interestingly, it is one of the annual crops I deal with. This annual legume would fit into all kinds of rotation, because it is short-lived and you can just plant it 1 year and take it out the same year. And the other important thing with this crop is it maintains quality all through the year, so you don't have to take multiple cuts. You can take one cut at the end of the year and you will still get as good an yield as alfalfa would give in 2 or 3 cuts. So our objective was to introduce or develop a crop that would have improved forage yield, seed yield, and have nutraceutical properties. Fenugreek is well known for its nutraceutical properties. It is used in many, many different situations, and it is also used as a condiment. It is one of the main ingredients in curry powder, you probably know that, and it has a lot of medicinal values. We're trying to produce good seed so that we will have high use of this seed as a health food crop. We have developed and released TriStar, the first North American forage fenugreek cultivar. TriStar produces high yield and high quality forage in Western Canada. High quality seed production in this area is not consistent due to indeterminate growth habit of TriStar. Therefore, presently we are focusing on improvement in disease resistance, seed yield, and seed quality without sacrificing forage yield. And we believe if we can produce high quality seed, then the health food market and the nutraceutical market would also be satisfied. Then going to the last crop I deal with, it's basin wall rye and giant wall rye. This is native grass to southern part of Alberta and Saskatchewan. So we have made significant collections all over the place. And we think because it is such a huge crop, it's about 8 feet tall, and we thought it probably would be suitable for biofuel industry, and many people thought it would be good for shelter belt. And also some of the habitat improvement people were interested in using this for habitat for birds and wild ungulates. But at this stage, we don't have a cultivar because it is native plant. We will probably release 3 or 4 different types of populations that can be combined and used at different places for different purposes. Okay, with that, I think I will go to the concluding remarks. And the first conclusion from my experience with forages is forage crops are an important component of industrial activity in general and agroforestry industry in particular. Forages are particularly important for sustainability of agriculture industry in countries like Canada, where meat and milk production are important. And then development of adapted forage cultivar and appropriate agronomic packages for optimizing forage and seed production needs to be given high priority. And at the end, I should say that more attention to forage crop research will give a much needed boost to a segment of agricultural industry, which for most part does not get the attention it deserves. So that is all I wanted to say today. I thank you all for your attention and for actually giving me this chance to talk to you.
All right, so we do have one last poll question here. So our last poll question is, how likely are you to implement any of the strategies described in this webinar? So not at all, somewhat likely, likely, or very likely. I'll give you a couple seconds there to answer those. All right. So it looks like nobody's saying not at all, so that's nice to see. About 40% say somewhat likely, 40% also say likely, and then 20% say very likely. All right. So we'll open it up now to questions. So if you do have any questions, you can type them on the chat box on the side of your screen. You should, if your control panel has closed, you should see an orange arrow near the top. You can click on that arrow and it'll expand again, and you can use the chat box to type in your questions. So your questions here are once again anonymous to the audience. So I'll read them out and Surya will answer them. So we did have a few submitted during the webinar here. So the first one is, how long does it take to develop a new forage variety?
Yeah, when I was talking about this, it probably sounded very simple, but it takes time. It takes a good about 10 to 12 years from the start of a project to see a variety in the marketplace. Because out of that 10 or 12 years, the 3-4 years at the end are just for testing. You have to test it widely, test it all Western Canada wide. We have determined that Eastern Canada has a very different environment compared to Western Canada. So we don't test all our material all over the country. We only stick to the Western Canada locations. but we have to test them in at least 12, 14 different locations before we register a cultivar. And that takes time. And being a forage crop is a perennial crop, it takes about 2 years to produce one cycle of selection. That is the reason why it takes longer for coming up with new varieties.
All right. Another question that was sent in beforehand. So, which older varieties of alfalfa are still considered viable in terms of disease resistance and productivity?
I think older varieties, before I started working here in 1989, did not have the high level of resistance to verticillium wilt and bacterial wilt, particularly alfalfa I'm talking about. They did not have as much resistance to verticillium wilt and bacterial wilt for Western Canada. Therefore, they will not be able to survive for very long if you use them. And we have many good, highly resistant cultivars now. Why go back to old varieties? That would be my question. And the other important thing is many people are not even just to save a little bit of money on seed, they go with old varieties or even brown bag seed, which actually is a disservice to the industry. In my opinion, I think you should grow newly released variety and grow certified seed. That way, the seed companies, those who are involved in plant breeding and things like that, and the Agriculture Canada scientists would be encouraged to come up with new varieties, good varieties, and at the same time, you will benefit from higher productivity and good seed.
All right. Is seed available for the saline and acid tolerant alfalfas? And if so, where?
Yes, I think the saline tolerant variety was given to CCAN, and acid tolerant cultivar was given to, I believe it went to North Star Seeds. So contact them, they should have seed available
All right.
for commercial production.
All right. So, is there work being done on breed strains of sainfoin that can be grown in wetter climates, such as those in Ontario?
So far, all the germplasm I've developed, all the populations I've developed, they are for dryland. With irrigation, they do well, but they don't like wet feet. So it would not be suitable for high rainfall areas. But I think it probably is a matter of time when somebody, I would try to help anyone who would like to conduct some of this in a wetter environment. But I think somebody else in Ontario probably has to take the lead, and I will provide all kinds of help, whatever I can from here.
So, does harvested sainfoin provide bloat prevention in forage mixes?
Yes, it does. Sainfoin is bloat-free completely. It has condensed tannins, unlike sisal milkweed, which does not have condensed tannins. Sainfoin has condensed tannins, and that's the reason why it prevents bloat even when it is cut and fed. All the other previous work was done on feeding animals in the pen, and it indicated that about 15% of sainfoin can prevent bloat when it is fed with alfalfa. But when you want to do it under direct grazing, I think I would suggest that we should have about aim for 20 to 25% sainfoin in the mix. And the other important, very, very important thing is make sure that the animal has access to both sainfoin and alfalfa at the same time. That means they should be grown in alternate rows. If you have strips of alfalfa and strips of sainfoin, it probably would take a lot more sainfoin proportion-wise to prevent the same level of bloat. And some of our trials here, where we planted them in strips, did not work as well as when it is planted in alternate rows.
All right. So, what are the protein and NDF levels in sainfoin Mountain View?
It is exactly like alfalfa, and sometimes it is even better than alfalfa. The NDF and ADF is slightly better than alfalfa because it has hollow stems, and it gets digested very, very quickly.
All right. So we have lots of questions coming in here. So
Okay. Sure.
would any of these varieties be able to be seeded directly into tame forage stands or rejuvenate or be used to rejuvenate existing hay fields?
That is exactly what I'm trying to do now. Now that we have some pastures that were depleted because of the sandfoin is completely out of the stand, particularly where we had seeded Nova, that gave us an opportunity to try to see if we can rejuvenate those stands by including by planting again or drilling again sandfoin seed into these stands. Time would tell. I just started it this year or last year, so give me another 2 years, I should be able to tell you whether it would work or not. Just throwing the seed on top is not going to work. We know that for sure. So don't broadcast seed in an existing stand and hope that you will have quick establishment. If you have patience, you can wait for 10 years, maybe you will have some plants growing, but for commercial purposes, I will not recommend that.
All right. So a question from a producer here that has native grass that they would like to cultivate. What is the best first crop to plant for eventually feeding cattle?
Native grasses, if you are cultivating, you can probably grow any grass that would, because what you're probably trying to do is eliminate all the weeds and everything that was there before. So grow a crop like wheat or barley where you can spray for broadleaf weeds and clean it up before you go into establishing a forage stand, which would be useful for your animal productivity.
All right. Next question here. Which seed companies sell the new sandfoin varieties that you were talking about?
Again, North Star Seed has the right to our first variety, the Mountain View sandfoin. You should contact them. I was told that whatever seed they had, they have already sold it for this year. But put your name in the in the waiting list so that next year at least you will get some seed. It's in big demand. I'm very glad that people are trying to use this new cultivar, and I'm really thrilled about it.
All right. So is there any upcoming developments in terms of native cultivars?
Native plants, I think Bruce Coleman works more extensively than I do. I'm just using, I had produced some native grass cultivars for reclamation purposes. I had started the work at Vegreville when I was working with the provincial government, and that work was mainly for reclaiming the mining areas and things like that where you needed some special type of grass which invades where there is no soil and things like that, and that's the reason why we had to make our own collection of native grasses. We have about 12 different varieties of native grasses released so far. If you are interested, you can write to me. I'll give you some of that information if you need.
Okay. And it looks like our last question here, unless something comes in here right away. In terms of sandfoin, does it grow back just as fast as alfalfa once it's reseeded?
That was the selection. That was the main selection criteria for me was, first of all, it should survive in alfalfa stand, and second, it should grow back at the same rate. Otherwise, the bloat prevention will not be there. And those are the two main things that this Mountain View would have. It would grow back quickly, and that's the reason why it prevents bloat even in the second or third cut.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It looks like we're out of questions for the night, so thank you very much for answering those. So there's just a couple more things before I let everyone go here. So first, I would like to encourage you to check out both the BCRC and Ag Canada's website for more information, and you can sign up there for our email list as well. If you have a Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube account, you can connect with us there as well. Also, as soon as the webinar ends, you're going to be asked to complete a short survey that asks about tonight's sessions and what you're most interested in for future webinar topics. We do need your feedback to do the best that we can to deliver information that's both useful and meaningful to you and can be actually used on your operation. So please complete that survey and don't hesitate to contact me with any questions or comments or suggestions at any time. You're also going to be receiving an email from me within the next couple of days with links to watch the recording, as well as some links to some additional information on forage varieties. So that's it. Thank you all at home for joining us tonight. And on behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank Surya for donating or volunteering your time and expertise. So good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye for